are some exciting coming attractions from Paramount.
Sirius 4, you are cleared for deorbit.
Copy, traffic control. Sirius 4, ready for pre-ignition.
Prepare for a journey to the outer limits of human understanding. Travel at the speed of imagination itself. Venture into realms of unimagined vastness, cosmic mystery, and stunning natural beauty. Guided by your host, Patrick Stewart.
Come with us, then. All aboard the spacecraft of the imagination.
It's time to embark on a journey from here to infinity, the ultimate voyage. From your starting point at a space station orbiting the Earth, you'll engage engines and accelerate into the adventure of a lifetime. Your trajectory will take you through the solar system to the nearest stars, to the edge of the Milky Way. Plunging into the swirling vortex of a massive black hole, you'll make your way to the very edge of the universe and beyond. Powered by a stunning digital stereo soundtrack, From Here to Infinity is a uniquely produced tour of the wonders of space for adventure lovers of all ages. All brought to life by Patrick Stewart. From Here to Infinity, the ultimate voyage. Priced at only $14.95. On video now from Paramount Home Video.
Now available on video cassette.
In a distant corner of our galaxy, a secret observatory is attacked. A brilliant scientist is found, and a mysterious ribbon of energy where past and future collide is unleashed.
It's a doorway that we call the Nexus.
Every ship which has approached the ribbon has either been destroyed or severely damaged.
Obviously, they were looking for something.
There's still no indication of why they attacked the station.
I must return to the observatory immediately.
There's nothing I can do.
Timing is very important in my experiment.
The hell's he doing?
I have an appointment with eternity, and I don't want to be late.
Someone doesn't care about weapons or power. He just cares about getting back to the Nexus.
The star is going to collapse in a matter of minutes.
That'll destroy everything in this system.
Population?
230 million, sir.
Why would he destroy a star? I have to stop him, but I can't do this alone. I need help.
I know someone who can.
You say history considers me dead. Who am I to argue with history?
You're a Starfleet officer. You have a duty.
I don't need to be lectured by you. I was out saving the galaxy when your grandfather was in diapers.
Now, the torch of adventure is about to be passed.
Eliminate them.
Klingon vessel decloaking directly ahead, sir.
Target their bridge!
Full disruptors!
Let's go! Bridge, we have a new problem!
All right, let's move them out. Let's go. Take them out.
10 seconds to warp core breach.
All hands, brace for impact!
Let's try and cheat death together.
Warp 1, engage!
Star Trek Generations.
Now available on video cassette. And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
is a tall ship and a star to steer by.
Welcome. I'm William Shatner. As I finished filming my last voyage as Captain James T. Kirk, I was suddenly struck by a flood of 3 decades worth of memories and reminiscences. This moving experience has allowed me to look at the whole Star Trek phenomena in a new, all-encompassing and appreciative light that it deserves. I am now, as my trek may be ending, able to see past the work, past the day-to-day machinations, and into the very reasoning behind what made Star Trek so wonderful. You, the fans, are the ones who have made all this possible, the ones who have celebrated and fought for every bit of Star Trek's existence. You are the reason it has endured and continued to live on. After spending a quarter century in the midst of the Star Trek universe, I can share stories of good times and some not so good times, memories that throughout the unparalleled documentation of the Star Trek universe have never been told before. Beyond everything else, I'd like to share with you the stories of the people who made Star Trek what it is. I want to let you in on some of the onstage, side stage, backstage goings-on that were all part of Star Trek for me. So with that in mind, let's proceed. Ahead, warp factor 2.
I knew that we had something very unique, something very special. Television is not known for respecting quality, and I predicted that with luck, at best, we'll have 2 seasons.
That's enough.
You're trying to be funny.
Never.
We were making a show for entertainment, but at the same time, the shows were about something. They were about the Vietnam War, or they were about any number of things that can be said in science fiction that sometimes can't be said in a straight drama.
I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor, not an escalator, not a bricklayer,
not a diplomat.
I always laugh when people ask me if I felt exploited in wearing the miniskirt. It was an expression of women's liberation.
All this power surging and throbbing. Are you like that, Captain?
You didn't think I had it in me, did you, Spock? No, sir.
The most significant thing that can be said
is dead, Chip.
If you are involved in Star Trek, don't wear a red shirt.
There's great adventure, great human themes, loyalty, decency, kindness, ethical questions being dealt with. Every episode hopefully would touch on a number of ideas that would grow on you if you watch the episode several times over your lifetime.
You're the captain. You haven't the right to be vulnerable in the eyes of the crew.
You broke my sword!
Fascinating.
Obviously, the Organians aren't going to let us fight. A shame, Captain. It would have been glorious.
Gene Roddenberry had a concept. It was Wagon Train to the Stars. It was going to be a group of people in space and their stories as things happen to them. Perhaps his genius, Roddenberry's genius, was collecting around him a group of very talented people, which made what was going to be a very good science fiction series into, at times, a great one. People like Matt Jeffries, who designed the Enterprise. He had made several sketches, and people would come by the sketches, the management would come by the sketches and say, well, we like that, but we don't like that. Oh, and this one here, we like that, but we don't. So he assembled all the liked parts of the various sketches, put them all together, and it became the Enterprise. Bill Tice, who was given a budget of $17.50, so he spent $1.50 on very filmy material, found the most beautiful girls, and put 75 cents of that $1.50 of filmy material over them, and that became part of the charm of Star Trek. And then there was the writing staff. Gene Coon is the unsung hero of Star Trek. He produced and wrote. He was a retired Marine colonel, and he set the tone. And a wonderful lady who started off as a secretary, but that was just a job, because what she wanted to do was write all the time, who said, hey, I can write one of those, and went on to write many, and to have a distinguished career in science fiction. Her name was D.C. Fontana.
I started working for Gene Roddenberry in 1963 on a series at MGM called The Lieutenant. It was a modern Marine story, and when he started to present Star Trek, he asked me to read a 12-page presentation, asked me what I thought of it. It was a skeleton of a series. There was the ship, the USS Yorktown. There were several officers outlined, Captain Robert April and Mr. Spock, and number one, who would have been the executive officer, a woman, which is an unusual idea for a science fiction show, still is. The series was to boldly go out there to find out what was there, what was on the horizon, what was in our universe, our galaxy. The original pilot was a very cerebral kind of pilot. You had to think about it. And we liked it a lot, but NBC said, you know, it's too cerebral. People will have to think about this. So Gene decided to go with a more adventure kind of pilot the second time out. It was unusual to be able to do a second pilot in the first place, so we were grateful for the chance that NBC gave us. There were 3 choices for the second pilot, one of which was the Samuel A. Peoples script, Where No Man Has Gone Before. One was Mudd's Women, which would have been a comedy, later done as an episode, but not quite pilot material. And the second one, or the third one, was Gene's own Omega Glory, which again was not quite pilot material. And NBC chose Where No Man Has Gone Before. In doing so, they decided they did not want to have the woman first officer. Coming down to it, Gene decided one of his ace cards, because he had always been there and he was a strong actor, was Leonard Nimoy as Mr. Spock. Move him up to be the first officer, science officer, and go with that. NBC was happy with that decision, although it was, in fact, forced on Roddenberry. He did not want to lose his woman first officer, but he had to.
I was doing a series called For the People, and we were up against the biggest show of the time called Bonanza at the height of its popularity, so nobody saw For the People. And I received a telephone call, and it was from a guy by the name of Roddenberry, who said, would I come to Hollywood to look at a pilot that they had made with an actor whom I admired called Jeffrey Hunter, that the pilot hadn't sold, but NBC was sufficiently intrigued with the project to try another pilot. And so I said, fine. And I sat in a darkened screen room and watched the first pilot with a woman in green paint wriggling in front of many people, and this strange kind of story that unfolded. So Roddenberry and I talked about what my feelings were on the first pilot, and what I thought was this. It seemed to me to need a more casual tone and a more fun tone. And so that's what I talked mostly about with Gene Roddenberry, and NBC wanted everything recast. And so everybody was recast with the exception of Leonard Nimoy, who took it upon himself to stop smiling, which gave his character a whole different demeanor. So in the first pilot, you can see him trying to be charming, and in the second, he is charming without trying to be. And thus began the second pilot, which then sold, and we shortly thereafter began to make our 79 episodes.
That was in the late 1960s.
Apparently, Captain. So are we.
So now I was Captain Kirk. And I had just come off of Alexander the Great and his dynamic leadership. I had done a lot of research on Alexander. And I'd also, not too many years prior to that, come off the classical stage, and I'd played Henry V at Stratford. And all those qualities of leadership and of nobility I tried to heighten. And those were things I thought about when playing the part.
This is Captain James Kirk of the USS Enterprise. We are on a peaceful mission. We mean no harm to you or any life forms. Please communicate with us. We're on 1,000 planets and spreading out. We cross fantastic distances, and everything's alive. Life everywhere. We estimate there are millions of planets with intelligent life. We haven't begun to map them. I'm in command. I could order this, but I'm not. Because Dr. McCoy is right in pointing out the enormous danger potential in any contact with life and intelligence as fantastically advanced as this. But I must point out that the possibilities, the potential for knowledge and advancement is equally great. Risk is our business. That's what this starship is all about. That's why we're aboard her.
And I felt so strongly about trying to make this successful that I poured everything I could into the role. So apparently that became part of the character. And then I see people doing that, and I wonder, what are they doing? And they're apparently imitating me. But anyway, I don't know. Captain Kirk was a leader. I had been in atomic submarines beforehand, and I'd seen how the captains of those vessels were set up. And the captains of those boats have a room all to themselves. And they're pretty much isolated by the fact that they're the commander. So there's the loneliness of command that actually exists. There's also the responsibility, ultimate responsibility, that resides on their shoulders, so that any decision that is made that has life and death attached to it, it's ultimately theirs. Everybody can advise them, but it's those captains' responsibility. So I thought that was really an indigenous part of playing Captain Kirk.
Not one man in a million could do what you and I have done. Command a starship. 100 decisions a day, hundreds of lives, staked on you making every one of them right.
Go to red alert. Prepare to fire phaser banks. Sensors, lock on. I get my hands on the headquarters genius that assigned me a female yeoman.
What's the matter, Jim? Don't you trust yourself?
I've already got a female to worry about. Her name's the Enterprise.
All this power at your command. Yet the decisions that you have to make.
Come from a very human source.
Are you, Captain?
You can count on it.
All this. And power, too. Caesar of the stars. And Cleopatra to worship him.
There were wondrous girls in briefest of costumes who kept traipsing back and forth. Sometimes they were even in the scene. For me, Captain Kirk was like the idealized version of me. You don't cry when you're hurt. You win the fight that you start or don't start. You win the fight that somebody else started.
Sit down. All right, Spocko, cover him. Now listen, sweetheart, the Federation's moving in. We're taking over. You play ball, we'll cut you in for a piece of the pie. You don't, you're out. All the way out, you know what I mean?
that painful, Captain?
So there was Kirk, the hero, and all the attributes of being a hero. And I think there was a show called the Corbomite Maneuver that exemplified the essence of what a hero can do to get out of a tight spot.
Your ship must be destroyed. We therefore grant you 10 Earth time periods, known as minutes, to make preparations.
There must be something to do. Something I've overlooked.
Chess. When one is outmatched, the game is over. Checkmate.
Not chess, Mr. Spock. Poker. Ship to ship. This is the captain of the Enterprise. Since the early years of space exploration, Earth vessels have had incorporated into them a substance known as Corbomite. If any destructive energy touches our vessel, a reverse reaction of equal strength is created, destroying...
You now have 2 minutes.
Destroying the attacker. Death has little meaning to us. If it has none to you, then attack us now.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
A very interesting game, this poker.
It does have advantages over chess.
The Spock-Kirk relationship was really one of the pivotal points of Star Trek. Leonard was born to play Spock. He made the Spock role uniquely his. He was a teacher, and that kind of teacherish quality about Spock has a great deal to do with Leonard. And the wry humor deep inside Spock is Leonard's too.
Most illogical.
I went to meet Gene thinking that I was being interviewed for a job. And he gave me some sense of what the show was about. He was very enthusiastic about it, walked me around to the various departments and showed me the props that were being developed. He showed me the set designs, talked in general terms about the character.
Mr. Spock was outlined in the original proposal as a Martian with reddish skin. He did have the pointy ears, and the arched eyebrows came later. It was one of those things where the character evolved. He was logical. He was very curious. He was the kind of character who could be a good counterpoint, a good foil for the captain, who was always adventurous. Whereas Mr. Spock had the idea or the attitude of holding back, looking to see what was going on before he leaped.
I thought this was going to be a very interesting character, a very interesting challenge for an actor to play this character with an internal conflict like that, being half alien, half human.
That's true. Mr. Spock, you're the most cold-blooded man I've ever known.
Why, thank you, Doctor.
What makes you right and a trained psychiatrist wrong?
Because she feels. I don't. All I know is logic. Fascinating. Fascinating. Fascinating.
Don't say it's fascinating.
No. But it is interesting.
It's also a very human condition. Most humans deal with this internal issue all the time. This control of emotion or living with emotion or dealing with emotion versus what Spock, of course, would call logic, or the intellect in general.
You must turn command over to somebody else. Only you can give your father the blood transfusions that he needs to live.
I cannot dismiss my duties.
Duty? Your duty is to your father.
I know. But this must take precedence. If I could give the transfusion without loss of time or efficiency, I would. Sarek understands my reason.
Well, I don't. It's not human. Oh, that's not a dirty word. You're human, too. Let that part of you come through.
The relationship between Spock and his parents was, I think, that of almost any teenager in the world with his or her parents. And it became an interesting character study and an interesting role model for a lot of young people who were sensing themselves being drawn into this struggle in their lives. Who am I? How do I identify myself? On what firm ground can I stand as a person and know that I'm okay?
Your father's dying.
Mother, how can you have lived on Vulcan so long, married a Vulcan, raised a son on Vulcan, without understanding what it means to be a Vulcan?
Well, if this is what it means, I don't want to know.
It means to adopt a philosophy, a way of life which is logical and beneficial. We cannot disregard that philosophy merely for personal gain.
Nothing is as important as your father's life. If being Vulcan is more important to you, then you'll stand there, speaking rules and regulations from Starfleet and Vulcan philosophy, and let your father die, and I'll hate you for the rest of my life.
Mother.
Oh, go to him now, please.
I cannot.
That was the logical, responsible thing to do. But from a human emotional position, it was very, very difficult and painful. Great source of drama. What to do? What's the right thing to do? These are tough questions for adolescents particularly, and for a lot of us all through our lives. Finally, I think we were able to establish that Spock really was on pretty solid ground much of the time.
And you, Sarek, would you also say thank you to your son?
I don't understand.
For saving your life.
Spock acted in the only logical manner open to him. One does not thank logic, Amanda.
Logic. Logic. I'm sick to death of logic. Do you want to know how I feel about your logic?
And there were two wonderful actors cast to play the roles, Jane Wyatt and Mark Leonard, to play the parents. She very human, he very Vulcan. What I also remember was them coming to me, because I had been playing Spock for some time, and they're stepping into the situation, and particularly Mark Leonard asking, what is there about Vulcans that I should know? And I said, well, it's worked for me to think in terms of Vulcans, among other things, as a hand-oriented people. There are certain hand-oriented rituals in the culture. And I would suggest, for example, that instead of holding hands, that you might try something a little bit more theatrical and ritualistic in your physical contact with each other. Why don't you try just touching fingers? And that's how that was born.
Emotional, isn't she?
She has always been that way.
Indeed. Why did you marry her?
At the time, it seemed the logical thing to do.
As the show got on the air, Spock was becoming popular. Fan mail came in, and Leonard became very, very popular. And I got concerned about that and went to Gene and said, well, gee, what's happening here? And Gene said something very wise, and I've never forgotten it. And that is, if you have a problem with somebody good, that you're afraid of somebody good with you, you're making a mistake. Somebody that's good, that is a fine talent beside you, can only enhance you and make you look better. And I took great comfort from those words and felt better about it. But I must say I got my most satisfaction in the Hollywood parade sometime later with Leonard sitting on the rim of the convertible, waving to the people. And the announcer saying, and ladies and gentlemen, here are the stars of Star Trek, William Shatner and Leonard Nimsey. I looked over at Leonard. I've called him Nimsey ever since. And we laughed. DeForest Kelley came to Star Trek perhaps more grandly than anybody else. He had had a prior relationship with Gene Roddenberry, had worked for him in other shows, and in fact, when the pilot was being made of Star Trek, Dee was cast in another pilot.
They called me in for this show that they were going to do in San Francisco about a famous criminal lawyer, Jake Ehrlich at the time. He was a very famous criminal lawyer. And we shot a show called 333 Montgomery. He had me defending a guy who's guilty as hell, of course, and and I got him off. It didn't go too well with the network. So he had wanted me for Star Trek, but I think the feeling at the network was that I had done so many of these bad guys, they couldn't see me as the Doctor. So he put me in another pilot called Police Story, and I portrayed a criminologist in the show. So I had called Gene to thank him for using me in both of those pilots. And he said, don't hang up. He said, the network saw you as a criminologist. And he said, now then, he said, we'd like to have you for the Doctor.
My name is McCoy. I'm a doctor. I'm just a country doctor. Stimulants. Doctor, you are a sensualist. You bet your pointed ears I am.
I just think each one of the characters was so important to each other, really. And this relationship began to develop. And it helped to bring out Leonard's character in that atmosphere. And it certainly helped to bring McCoy out. All I had to do was just follow Leonard around, and I had it down pretty good.
That McCoy and Spock relationship, that Bickerson kind of fighting, was always used for comedic advantage. And every time Spock said something, McCoy would have an answer. Or McCoy would say something and Spock would zing him.
Once, just once, I'd like to be able to land someplace and say, behold, I am the Archangel Gabriel.
I fail to see the humor in that situation, Doctor.
Naturally. You could hardly claim to be an angel with those pointed ears, Mr. Spock, but say you landed someplace with a pitchfork.
The relationship between those two formed the basis of much of Star Trek's comedy.
On pure speculation, just an educated guess, I'd say that man is alive.
He's dead, Jim. She's dead, Jim. He's dead, Jim.
Well, it got to a point to where I was trying to say it in so many different ways, you know. He's dead, Jim.
She's dead, Jim.
He's dead, Captain.
He's dead, Jim.
I'd switch it around. Sometimes I'd say, Jim, he's dead.
He's dead. She's dead. He's dead.
She's dead. We're dying.
He's dead.
She's dead.
He's dead, Captain.
The captain is dead.
And I think that's probably going to be on my tombstone. He's dead, Jim.
He was worse than dead.
Come on, Bones, what's the mystery?
His brain is gone.
I can't give you warp 9 much longer, Mr. Spock. These engines are beginning to show signs of stress.
Jimmy Doohan, I had known in Canada. He was a first-class radio actor up there, and his facility was voices and different characters vocally. And when I came to the States and the part of the engineer came up, if I remember correctly, I went to bat for Jimmy to get the part.
I think they wanted some sort of an international flavor to it, and so I did about 8 different accents for them. Then Gene Roddenberry asked me which accent I liked, and for an engineer. And I said, I think the Scotsmen are great engineers. Let's face it. They invented the steam engine, the telephone, radar, just about everything that is vitally important to us these days. I said, you want an engineer, I think he better be a Scotsman.
If we keep this speed, we'll blow up any minute now. If I push these impulse engines too hard in the condition they're in, they'll blow apart. The emergency bypass control of the matter-antimatter integrator is fused.
But supposing they had picked some other accent, and when Captain Kirk calls down to engineering and says, give me warp 12, and instead of hearing the familiar, warp 12, Captain, I'm giving her all she's got, you hear, you be young, Kirk, eh? Well, sir, I'll see you hanging from the highest yardarm in Starfleet before I'll give you a warp 12. Ha ha! Or we have Reggie, who would answer the captain something like this, I'm terribly sorry, sir, but I can't seem to get the little buggers to move any faster.
Well, Scotty, now you've done it.
Aye, the haggis is in the fire for sure. Richelieu, beware!
Somewhere in somebody's mind, maybe it was Gene, maybe it was Joe DeAugusta, the casting director, somebody had the most marvelous and, I think, innovative concept of that time to have a multicultural crew, that in the years to come, it wouldn't just be one race, but many, and glory in the many varied idiosyncrasies. And so George Takei was cast as Sulu, and this intelligent, lithe, deep-voiced actor came upon the scene, and he brought a special quality and a special weight to the part of Sulu.
I recognized right away that the character that Gene Roddenberry was describing was a breakthrough role for an Asian character. Because up until that time, television had always characterized Asian characters in stereotypes. And here was the character of Sulu that Gene was describing to me, a member of the leadership team of this starship. I was blown away by that.
Helmsman engine room, stand by. All decks alert. We're gonna try pulling away. Romulans approaching from both sides. Helm doesn't answer. We can't move.
There's a story that's been told about me that I think I need to set straight. There's this impression somehow that George Takei is absolutely uncontrollable with a fencing foil. Well, this is what really happened. For me, that day's scene was the fencing sequence. So I found a flat way off in the corner, and I got behind it, and I was practicing my lunges and my ahs, you know, far away from where the action was. But my dear friend Jimmy Doohan has an insatiable curiosity, and he peeked around the flat just at that very moment as I was lunging, and I missed his nose literally by inches, and his eyes popped open, and he turns around, and with terror flying in his hairs, and he goes rushing off, and didn't give me a chance to apologize or explain that. And the next thing you know, the word is spreading that George attacked Jimmy, and some rumors have it that I even bloodied him. But the truth is, I am an actor of integrity, preparing for my scene, out of the way, behind the flat, and it's this nosy busybody who placed himself deliberately, albeit unwittingly, in harm's way.
You either leave this bois bloodied, or with my blood on your swords.
Shields on. Phasers. Men and ready, sir.
So now we're in our second season, and along comes a young actor who came from the Neighborhood Playhouse, a distinguished acting school in New York, and his name was Walter Koenig. And they asked him to do a Russian accent, which was very courageous casting at that time. We were at the height of the Cold War. But his look was something else.
The publicity department let out that Pravda had complained that there wasn't a Russian aboard the bridge. If this was such an intercultural group, certainly Russians should be represented. The fact of the matter is that they weren't watching Star Trek Behind the Iron Curtain. And as I say, it was the inspiration of somebody at NBC Publicity. The truth of the matter is they were looking for somebody who would attract the same kind of audience that the people on the Monkees had. And in actuality, they were looking initially for a young English person. I think Gene prevailed at that point and said, you know, the Russians were the first people in space, the cosmonauts, and some recognition should be made of that fact. So let's bring in a Russian who will have the appeal of the Monkees.
I've been wanting to get you in a place like this for a long time.
What can I do, Captain? You know we're always supposed to maintain good relations with the natives.
The situation that I always found most difficult was to look out into space and see some extraordinary image and respond to it, when in fact what we were looking at was the soundstage. And we would see the crew people standing around, drinking coffee, scratching themselves. It was very distracting. What happened then was they would erect a metal stanchion with a white metal flag, and they'd say, okay, everybody look at that, don't look at the crew guys. That was well and good, but then introduced a whole new problem. Because one of these same guys who was scratching themselves would bring in the centerfold of Playboy and paste it or tape it to the white metal flag. And there poor Chekhov was, it's a relatively young man at the time, looking out into space, supposed to sing all sorts of extraterrestrial grotesquerie, where in fact he was looking at this beautiful naked lady whose arms were beckoning to him, his intention was to invite him into her boudoir. And Chekhov having to sit there, with a look of consternation and of wonder, and say, "Captain, I don't know what that is."
We are programmed to function as human females, Lord.
You are?
Yes, my lord.
This place is even better than Leningrad.
Lieutenant Uhura, try to contact that ship.
Captain, I'm picking up the alien signal again.
Nichelle Nichols came to the company with a background in dancing and singing as a wonderful performer. And she has this bubbling personality, this effervescence that communicates itself on the screen.
In meeting with Gene Roddenberry, he brought up this book that I was reading that we had all talked about, Uhuru, which was a wonderful treatise on Africa. Uhuru means freedom in Swahili. And he said, I've been thinking about where you come from, what's your background. And rather than having you from the United States, what do you think about you being from the United States of Africa? From one of the advanced tribes, and we developed what my language would be Swahili. What tribe I came from would be Bantu. Who my parents were. One was a physicist and one was an artist. The mother was an artist. And he said, I've been thinking about, I love that name, Uhuru. Is there a comparable name in it? And finally I said, Uhura. And he said, I love it. And so that's how Uhura came to be. And when the story of Star Trek was being written, the writer called me and said, I can't find a first name for Uhura. What is her first name? And he said, well, I have a name in mind. I looked up the Swahili, and what do you think of Nyota? And I said, it sounds beautiful. What does it mean? He says, in Swahili it means star. And I said, you got it. Definitely. And I've always thought of that, of her name being a free star, or a star of freedom, or free floating star. I just like that a lot.
Failing on all frequencies, sir. All languages have been attempted. No response. Security alert. Condition 3. All sections go to alert condition 3.
Uhura was a wonderful character to create. Not only a woman on that bridge as part of the command crew, but a black woman. And people could look on that screen for the first time and see equality without hitting you on the head with it. The fact that I'm there was a statement.
Progress report?
It's very delicate work, sir.
I can think of no one better equipped to handle it, Miss Uhura. Please proceed.
As we were coming up to our second season, Nichelle Nichols felt disappointed in the amount of work she had to do in the show. It wasn't enough for her to do, and she decided time had come to move on and to continue her entertainment career.
So I had given it careful thought, and I went into Gene Roddenberry and told him that after the first year I intended to leave the show. And he was very upset. That very weekend I went to an NAACP fundraiser, and someone came to me and said, Miss Nichols, there's someone who wants to meet you. He's a great fan of yours. And I expected to turn around and see some young person, and I turned around into the face of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I was stunned, and he said, yes, I'm your fan. I'm a big fan of yours. He says, as a matter of fact, my entire family, we never missed the show. And I said, thank you very much. And as he spoke some more, I said, well, I'm very happy about that. And of course, I'm leaving the show after this first year. And he said, you cannot. And I was taken aback, and I beg your pardon. He said, "Don't you know who you are? Don't you know what you have? Don't you know you are a part of history? You're opening a door that simply must not be allowed to close. Your being on the Starship Enterprise, fourth in command, going in peaceful exploration. You are changing the face of television forever. You have created a character with dignity and beauty and intelligence, and you are a role model." And he said, "And I don't mean for little black children." He said, "Your most important input is for everyone who doesn't look like us, who sees us for the first time as we should be seen, as equals, in peaceful exploration. Nichelle, you cannot leave." And I was simply chilled. And I said, "Thank you, Dr. King." And that Monday, when I went back to tell Gene Roddenberry what Dr. King had said, and I said to him, "If you still want me to stay, I'll stay." And I'll never forget Gene coming and hugging me, and a tear in his eye. And he said, "Thank God somebody important out there understands what I'm trying to achieve."
I think the Starship Enterprise was a metaphor for Starship Earth. And when you saw the bridge of the Enterprise, you saw the makeup of all of the various kinds of people that populate the Starship Earth. But the real statement made by that weekly exposure to that pluralism was that was our strength, that we have to recognize that diversity not as a problem or something that's going to divide us, but as the very thing that makes it possible for us to survive. And by working as a team, by tapping the best in us, we can move forward and live long and prosper.
One of the things that I appreciated most in Star Trek, beyond the wonderful roles that were written for Captain Kirk and beyond the entertainment it seemed to have provided for so many people, were the fact that there were underlying meanings at the best of the Star Trek episodes. And those underlying meanings weren't messages. They were merely means of hooking you, the audience, into listening because it's something you recognize.
There's an ancient Chinese curse which says, "May you live in interesting times." And we had them in the 60s. We have them now too, obviously. It hasn't stopped. But it was an extremely chaotic, difficult time, and a very fertile ground for picking up metaphoric drama ideas. I think our writers captured a lot of those ideas extremely well. They were very sensitive to what was going on at the time, and tried very much to bring to bear in Star Trek and our 23rd century stories that had to do with something that was happening on Earth today that people could recognize.
It is obvious to the most simple-minded that Lokai is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Are you blind, Commander Spock? Well, look at me. Look at me.
You're black on one side and white on the other.
I am black on the right side. Lokai is white on the right side. All of his people are white on the right side. Do you remember the 20th century brush wars on the Asian continent? Two giant powers involved, much like the Klingons and ourselves. Neither side felt that they could pull out.
Yes, I remember. It went on bloody year after bloody year.
Well, what would you have suggested? One side arm its friends with an overpowering weapon? Mankind would never have lived to travel space if they had.
What set Star Trek apart, I think, was the fact that we could tell almost any story we wanted to, under the guise of science fiction. NBC censorship was fairly strong at the time, and other shows could not, for instance, tell stories about the war in Vietnam. You couldn't tell stories about political issues. You couldn't tell stories about the kind of human issues that were creating riots in cities and riots on college campuses. Star Trek could. Star Trek could slip it by under the guise of, hey, it's happening on another planet, guys. And we did.
The troglodytes are workers, Captain. Oh, surely you must be aware of that. They mine xenite for shipment, till the soil. Those things cannot be done here.
In other words, they perform all the physical toil necessary to maintain Stratus.
That is their function in our society.
But they are not allowed to share its advantages.
How can they share what they do not understand?
Doctor, you insist on applying human standards to non-human cultures. I remind you that humans are only a tiny minority in this galaxy.
There's certain absolutes, Mr. Spock, and one of them is the right of humanoids to a free and unchained environment. The right to have conditions which permit growth.
Another is their right to choose a system which seems to work for them.
This isn't life. It's stagnation.
One of the bigger whoop-de-doos in Star Trek was this interracial kiss that became so famous. In 1968, the times were different. Integration was happening, and the idiocy of race relationships was stirred up. And into that stirred up pot came a show in which Kirk and Uhura were going to kiss.
I'm so frightened, Captain. I'm so very frightened.
We hardly thought anything about it, the first interracial kiss on television, because the races have been kissing since time immemorial. This was just the first time they emitted it on television. And we received more mail on that episode than we had ever received before. And Gene sent me a letter, and the letter was from a man from the South who said, I don't believe in the mixing of the races, but anytime a red-blooded American boy like Captain Kirk gets a gal in his arms that looks like Lieutenant Uhura, he ain't gonna fight it. So much for the big concern over the first interracial kiss.
Star Trek started in '66, which was at the peak of the hippie generation, where the youth didn't know what to do, where to go. They were out on freeways hitchhiking with their dog and that sort of thing. And we picked up a great hippie audience, which was witnessed in the free press, where they would run an ad and say, let's all light up and look at Star Trek tonight at a certain phone number call, that sort of thing. So I think the Star Trek, with them, they saw this group of professional people going about their jobs with this underlying great friendship that was there, this comradeship. I think that Star Trek touched a chord with them. It showed them that there was some place to go. There is a great future ahead of us. I think Star Trek did an awful lot of good for that particular generation as well as many others.
To me, the really heart of Star Trek was this relationship between three divergent characters: emotionalism, logic, and the combination of both in the commander. And that tension between them gave the series a thrust. Also, underneath all that, the three of us really cared for each other anyway. So you could see the characters really caring. There was just disagreement. And those led to the most wonderful comedic times as well as dramatic times, and exemplified best, I think, in a show called Amok Time.
Amok Time was the first episode in which we were going to deal with the Vulcan society, see some of the culture, see some of the rituals of the culture. And the plot dealt in a rather complex and very interesting, dramatic way with this issue of loyalty and friendship.
Spock, are our ceremonies for Outworlders?
They are not Outworlders. They are my friends.
Very exciting show for me because it was the first time we were going back to Vulcan. And I was looking for opportunities to explore those things that would be special about Vulcans. Spock amongst his peers, amongst his colleagues. Spock on Vulcan, dealing with Vulcan society, dealing with Vulcan traditions and rituals. And it occurred to me when we were to play the scene where Spock first meets T'Pau, who is the matriarch of Vulcan, and Spock is to approach her, and they're supposed to greet each other, having been apart from Spock, having been away for many years. And I was looking for something that they do, that Vulcans do. And I pointed out to the director that humans shake hands as a matter of greeting. Military people salute each other. Asians have a bowing ritual that they do. There are various traditions in various cultures. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if the Vulcans had something unique that they did when they met? And that's how this was born. I suggested it to the director, and it was accepted, and that's what we did. Spock was in physical trouble at the beginning of the episode, and it was reported by Dr. McCoy, as I recall, to the captain, that if something wasn't done to help Spock, he would die. And that thing that Spock needed doing was to be taken to his home planet to mate. And Kirk defies Federation orders to take his friend to Vulcan, because that's the loyal thing to do for a friend. On the other hand, Spock, in his terrible plaque tau condition, which is a totally distraught and out of control condition when he's going through this process on Vulcan, is forced into a physical fight, a fight to the death with Kirk.
You're gonna have to kill him, Joe.
Kill Spock? That's not what we came to Vulcan for, is it?
Now be careful.
Sound medical advice.
Die Arme!
Get your hands off of him, Spock. It's finished. He's dead.
I grieve with thee.
And one of the most poignant moments that I ever got to play on the show was that in which I say to T'Pau, live long and prosper.
Live long, T'Pau, and prosper.
Live long and prosper, Spock.
I shall do neither. I have killed my captain and my friend. Doctor, I shall be resigning my commission immediately, of course. There can be no excuse for the crime of which I'm guilty. I intend to offer no defense. Furthermore, I shall order Mr. Scott to take immediate command of this vessel.
Don't you think you better check with me first?
Captain! Jim!
I was accused of smiling. Audiences have accused me for years of smiling. I don't think I did. I think I grimaced, but they took it for a smile.
I'm pleased to see you, Captain. You seem uninjured. I am at something of a loss to understand it, however.
Blame McCoy. That was no Triox compound he shot me with. He slipped in a neural paralyzer. Knocked me out. Simulated death.
Indeed.
There's just one thing, Mr. Spock. You can't tell me that when you first saw Jim alive that you weren't on the verge of giving us an emotional scene that would have brought the house down.
Merely my quite logical relief that Starfleet had not lost the highly proficient captain.
Yes, Mr. Spock, I understand.
Thank you, Captain.
Of course, Mr. Spock. Your reaction was quite logical.
Thank you, Doctor.
In a pig's eye.
Come on, Spock, let's go mind the store.
The fans rode in great numbers to the studio at NBC, orchestrated by Roddenberry and some others, to write the executives and tell them to keep Star Trek on the air. In fact, there was a guerrilla contingent of fans who went around the NBC parking lot and pasted on the bumpers of all the executive cars, Star Trek Lives. And that was the ultimate that was a paste-in campaign.
Robert Bloch and Harlan Ellison went to Science Fiction Writers of America and said, we have a stake in this show. Let's get some letters into the network. So we got letters from science fiction writers, but then fans started picking it up and began writing. And at that time, maybe it's still true, one letter to the network corresponded in their minds to 100 letters. So when they started getting thousands of letters, they suddenly perked up and said, it might be worth renewing this show. And we didn't realize that the fans were that dedicated. I mean, they wrote to us to say, yeah, we love you, send a picture, that kind of thing. But it was interesting to see them all writing to the network and saying, we love this show, please keep it on. And there was the unprecedented on-air announcement from NBC. It was after a Lyndon Johnson speech. In fact, it was the speech where he said, I will not run, even if nominated. And right at the end of that came this amazing announcement from NBC saying Star Trek will be on again next year, which was the signal to fans to say, you can stop writing now, we got the message.
Between the second and third seasons, our time slot was changed. It was given to Laugh-In. We moved to Friday nights late. It was the death slot, as the coffin slot, I think they called it. And our budgets were cut, if you can believe this, to $178,000 a show. So we were left with the third season, striving to maintain what quality we could. Personally, I think the third season was a good one anyway. We had some good shows, but they were made very cheaply. And we were given our notice on January 9th, 1969, and the show ended. And of course, now what do you do? Now that you've been encompassed in the arms of Paramount for 3 years, get out of the nest, you're done. What do you do?
We went off the air in the spring of '69, and I think 3 years later was when I began to feel something percolating. I thought the show would have been history by then, maybe a year or two of reruns and drift away into oblivion. And instead, my mail was getting heavier. The phone was ringing more and more often with requests for discussions, for press interviews about Star Trek. Appearances, more and more appearance requests. And then this phenomenon of the conventions started. Handfuls of fans would decide to gather to talk about episodes and exchange memorabilia, whatever, and hundreds would show up. When hundreds were expected, thousands showed up. And it was all really grassroots and very spontaneous because of the syndication thing that was happening. The show was finding an entirely new audience that it had not found in the 60s.
May you all live long and prosper.
I've often been asked why Star Trek has stayed around so long, why people continue to be interested in not only in the show that I was in, but in the Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, and who knows how many more manifestations of Star Trek. And there's really no answer, because we're all guessing. People talk about science fiction, and the people talk about the stories, and people talk about adventure and the mechanics and the special effects and the design and even the pretty girls. But I don't think any of that answers why Star Trek has appealed to the hundreds of countries that it's been in.
I am a little surprised at its long life. We were just starting out to do an interesting, good quality show, science fiction show, a little different, but something that would attract viewers. We never realized how many people there are out there who would live with it and love it for years.
I was walking down a corridor in Heathrow, London, And I heard this hustle and bustle behind me, Well, I'd heard hustle and bustles before, and I knew what to expect, but I didn't know who to expect. And pretty soon, about 15 or 20 young people, they came around in front of me, and they point at me and say, "You, Scotty." I said, "Yes, but who are you and where are you from?" Says, they stuck out their chests and they said, "We're in Malaysia." Boy, Singapore and Malaysia and Indonesia and all those. My gracious, it's unbelievable, really, But it's obviously supposed to be in every language in the world. And I understand that the vice president in charge of education in China for television, the people said, "Why'd you pick Star Trek?" Well, he says, "The Chinese like good stories, too."
I was sitting at dinner in a restaurant not so many months ago with a bunch of actor friends who didn't want to talk about Star Trek. Actors in general don't want to hear about other people working, and I understand that. And so the conversation was in other arenas. When a young woman came over, her hands shaking and held together, I guess to help her steady herself, and asked me in a very small voice if I was who in fact she thought I was. And I said, "Well, yes, I guess I am." And she said, "Could you please come over to the table and prove this to my girlfriend? We have a bet and she doesn't believe it's you." And I started to rise and she said, "Oh, and by the way, could you please sing Hey Hey Where the Monkeys?"
Every actor looks back and thinks, what might have happened? Well, the chances are that telephone may not have ever rang again, But as I look back on it, I look at it and think it's the greatest ride any actor could have ever had. I think we have had experiences that very few actors will ever have. To have been at Edwards Air Force Base that day they rolled the Enterprise out with the Marine Band playing, the Star Trek theme while this huge shuttlecraft comes out, and I look at Gene Roddenberry and I look at Leonard, and all of us are there with the tears streaming down. Very emotional moment. And the love, that when we go on personal appearances and you look out and you see 10,000 people that are out there, screaming and yelling and still wanting to know all about you. I'm very grateful. I think Star Trek has been very wonderful to me. And if I never work again, I've had a wonderful ride.
To me, it's personally a prideful thing to be associated with a show that not only has lasted this long, the longevity has been really extraordinary, but to be identified with a show that has ideals and ideas that are admirable. I think it's very important that philosophy not remain just an ideal out there, but we incorporate it into our lives and act on it. And certainly that's part of the message of Star Trek.
It was a format for what our future can be, one of harmony and respect and progress and adventure and intelligence and going in peaceful exploration with IDIC. Infinite diversity and infinite combinations is what makes this universe beautiful and worth living. And that is the legacy Gene Roddenberry gave to this world.
Star Trek was everything that I had hoped to be involved with as an actor in my life. Wonderful character to play, wonderful ensemble work to do, and great ideas to deal with. Great ideas and some wonderful writing and direction. So obviously it gave me a career. And for Gene Roddenberry and his vision in that respect, I'm a very grateful guy.
The only explanation I had why Star Trek has stayed around so long, why people continue to be interested, is a kind of self-important one, but it may hold true. And that is, I think there's that has something to do with mythology. I don't think that our culture has any mythology. Mythology is a kind of fairy tale bridge between reality and unreality. And all the cultures that I can think of have had it. We have none of that. We have none of that kind of linkage. And I think we hunger for it. And I think that Star Trek, with its hardy band of followers and its heroes and its villains and its tale of good and evil, provide modern culture with a kind of mythology that also bespeaks of the future and the certainty that the future will exist.
Few, if any, science fiction programs have reached the level of critical or popular recognition that Star Trek has achieved. Actually, none of them have. Since Star Trek first appeared on television, man has walked on the moon, Voyager 2 has left our solar system, plans are being made for manned flight to Mars, and there really is a spacecraft named Enterprise. Coincidence? Possibly. Star Trek, it seems, was pronounced dead prematurely in 1969 by NBC. Almost 3 decades later, with a continuing syndicated run of the original series, 3 spin-off television series, successful cartoons, comic books, novels, and of course 7 feature films, I'm tired. It seems funny now that this struggling television series' unhappy ending has been transformed into the opening chapter of a far bigger tale, an astonishing tale that is unsurpassed in the history of entertainment. Nothing is more certain than the fact that Star Trek's mission has just begun, but that's another story. The journey continues.